Well, welcome back to the Redeem Her Time podcast. You guys are going to love the lineup of guests that I have for you in this new year. And we are starting off with another really powerful guest and having a conversation around something that affects probably all of us to some level, whether we know it or want to admit it or have an official diagnosis or not. And that is time anxiety. Da, 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 right? But no worries because I've got my friend Megan Devito with me today, and she is so fun. We are two curly girls, if you're not watching us on YouTube, who love Jesus and love helping others and are really on a mission to make a difference. And so we are going to partner together on this episode and help this message get out. So, Megan, I am so excited you're here, another Midwest girl as well. Tell us a little bit about this season of life outside of business. What all are you juggling? Like, what kinds of things are filling your time these days?
Yeah, well, we're recording this the week before Christmas. So my time is very Christmassy right now, which I love. I love the season. So I've really been trying to intentionally slow down, really since November and putting the brakes on busyness. So I'm really excited to be able to talk with you today because this has been something that you just mentioned that we don't necessarily recognize it for what it is, but it's anxiety, right? Anxiety makes us feel fast. It makes things feel urgent. And I'd known that I've been a fast mover. I've been an action taker my whole life, but I decided in November that nothing was working for me. I was doing a million things and just kind of like grouchy about things, and my business was not fantastic. And I decided, forget it. I'm not doing that anymore. And so my plan, I say that like I just didn't, but my body revolted against me. My brain revolted against me because that's what happens. But I really got intentional about slowing down, about doing less, about being intentional in what I was doing and what I was thinking. And it feels good. It didn't feel good at first, but today, the week before Christmas, I'm so thankful that I did it because I'm enjoying Christmas. I am making, I'm making time with my kids, and I'm just taking time to sit on the couch and watch old episodes of The Office with my family because we're cracking up together at the Christmas episodes. And, we're just doing things without like, oh, I can't, you guys, I have so much I have to do.
Yeah,
So
right.
that's really what I've been leaning into and just getting excited for what is going to happen in 2025 because I think there are really great things coming for all of us.
Yes. I love this because we do have a choice. And I feel like so many of us get to, whether it's the holidays when we're recording this, whether it's the new year when you guys are listening to this, whether it's whatever time of year that all of a sudden now feels really, busy, we just feel like, well, what can I do? Like it's just a busy season, or there's, just all these expectations and obligations and distractions and interruptions, the four shuns I talk about
Mhm.
going on, and there's nothing I can do but just kind of get taken up in, the stream of everything that's around me and get swept down river, and then, who
Mhm.
knows where you end up. So I love that you are exemplifying the fact that that's not true. We don't have
That's not
to
true.
just let the
Yeah.
culture around us or even our own
Yeah.
patterns up until a certain point
Yeah.
be what whisk us away and and throw us out some other place and on the bank and go, what just happened? So there is
Mhm.
intention, right? And there is
Oh,
choice,
yeah.
and that's really important. But I know that you didn't just arrive there one day, that this is all kind of coming from your journey
Mhm.
and and what you do now. So maybe kind of
Mhm.
start by telling us what you do, because I want us to like
Mhm.
be able to put you in the here and now in your business.
Mhm.
Then I want
Mhm.
you to take us back to whatever point on the journey that you want to kind of
Okay.
share a little bit about how God brought you to doing what you do today to serve others.
Yeah. So I help women, high achievers in particular, work through the anxious feelings in their body and the habits and the thoughts that follow those things so that they can have less overwhelm, they can reduce their stress and really go out and be successful, but also have fun. And I think that's so important because it's really hard to feel anxious when you're having fun. You can feel incredibly anxious and turn on your favorite song and dance in your kitchen, and suddenly it's not there anymore. And I think that that's pretty telling. So I help those women who are out there like, oh, I know that I have this inside of me. I have no idea how to get it out, and it's just killing me. I keep trying, I keep doing, I keep worrying and asking myself, what if? I'm like, hold on. I know that that feels really important and really urgent and really true. It does feel true that you don't have any time. It does feel true that people are talking about you. It does feel true that something's wrong with you, but it doesn't mean it's actually true. And that's kind of what I wish I would have known when I was a little kid, I guess. I have a really long, I guess God would cut, maybe it was like trench work for like 30 years. That feels excessive to me, but it was 30 years of an anxiety disorder, like a general, like a diagnosed anxiety disorder, where I had really severe health anxiety. To the point where when I was in college, I wouldn't shake people's hands because I assumed I probably had a tiny cut and they were probably bleeding, and then I would get AIDS and die. Like to that irrational extent, which anxiety is always irrational, but it felt really scary and it made me feel really true. And so I dealt with that, like being afraid of every feeling inside of my body, of every thought that I had, and not really realizing that I could choose those thoughts and just recognize them as thoughts. I felt like they were premonitions. Oh my gosh, maybe God's trying to tell me something. Maybe I need to fix this. And that went on until I was almost 40 years old. And I was taking a walk and I'm listening to this audiobook. And the author of the audiobook said, worry is wishing for what you don't want. And I
Ooh,
stopped
say
and I
that
thought,
again. Say that again.
yeah, worry is wishing for what you don't want.
Ooh, okay.
And I thought, well, who would do that? And then I literally stopped
Ding, ding,
walking in the middle.
ding.
Right. It stopped walking in the middle of the road and was like, oh,
Here comes
wait,
lightning.
me, that I would do that for 30 years. And I don't, this sounds so silly in hindsight. I don't think it ever occurred to me that I didn't have to believe everything that I thought. I just assumed if I thought it, it probably deserved my attention. I was a smart kid. I was a creative kid. I didn't study because that was really hard because I was so distracted by how I felt all the time. But I still got decent grades. I mean, I went to college. I graduated from college. I got married. I had kids. It never dawned on me that just because something felt scary or true or real or important, that it didn't actually mean that it was. So that one phrase, that worry is wishing for what you don't want, was just like, it was exactly what I needed. And it flipped something in me. And maybe I was already on a good path because I had started walking. I would love to tell you that I was taking afternoon walks every day for some sort of like mindfulness thing, but I wasn't. I was doing it because I have 4 kids and I was tired and it was very loud. And I just wanted some peace and quiet. And honestly, after they went to bed, I wanted to eat more cookies and I gained weight. So I took walks every day to eat cookies and have some peace and quiet. But it worked for me and it got me to where I am. It really, things fall in line the way they're supposed to fall in line. And after 30 years and figuring out, oh, wait, there are these really simple things you can do that as soon as I learned these, it's not that I never felt anxious again. It's just that if you feel anxious and it doesn't control you, does it matter? And it really doesn't because it goes away when you don't give it attention. And I think
Ooh.
it's so often when we feel that it feels very, very important. And like, I have to do this. I have to pay attention. I have to make this go away. And what I know, even from times when I start researching how to help my clients feel better, the more I research, I start to notice that I feel anxious. And I'm like, wait. What do I already know? And why is it already working for me? And when I do that, I'm a better coach. I'm less anxious and they're less anxious because I'm like, not everything deserves your attention.
Girl, okay. There is
Yeah.
so much here that I cannot wait to unpack. First of all, it's
Yeah.
so interesting that the journey we're on, the people that we're helping today are exactly who we were. And, back in the
Absolutely.
day,
Yeah.
and sometimes, yeah, not even
Yeah.
long ago. And it's interesting because
Right.
you were 40 when like you kind of had this aha or in your 40s. And that was really
Hmm.
my story was like it wasn't until like that season of life. And I think there's something beautiful about midlife. And that's why I'm
Yeah.
really passionate about working with women in midlife because I feel like there's
Yeah.
a lot of resources out there for busy moms, right? There's a lot of, and again, if I could have
Right.
changed and if you could have changed back in our 20s and 30s when we were raising little younger kids, that would have been amazing. But
Right.
there's not as much for this midlife season and this season where we think we should have it all together and we should think we should have,
Hmm.
I should have my time figured out. I should have my anxiety figured out. I should,
Right.
all these things. And so I love this because I want those who are listening to know, number one, you're not behind something. It's never too late. Like, like
Hmm.
it is today is the best day to work on you and the things that God has given you to steward, which is your
Absolutely.
thoughts, your life, your time, your business, like all of these things. So permission that not to shame yourself because you should have been doing
Yeah.
this better all along, right? So I love that.
Yeah.
Um, and this, okay, let's talk a little bit about this thought part of it because you
Hmm.
said like it feels like da da da, it feels like da da da, it feels like da da da, but that's not necessarily true. So like,
Yeah.
yeah, like what? Okay, but how do we let it be true? Because what happens, and I have a tool that I use called the steer belief map. We take a situation, we keep
Hmm.
the situation neutral, so they're not allowed.
Hmm.
It's raining outside today. Boom, that's your
Hmm.
situation. Now your T is your thought. What is that
Right.
you're thinking about that situation? Well, it's raining and, that makes me feel a little da 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 da, whatever, right? Which then
Right.
is going to lead to
Right.
the emotion, which is then going to lead to our execution or lack thereof, what we're doing. And
Hmm.
that's going to lead to our results, which always reflects the thoughts. And so I teach this method of the steer belief map to take those thoughts captive.
Hmm.
So talk us through kind of your version of like, okay, so I'm coming up, I have this thought of like, for example, okay, because everyone listening here cares about their time. Um,
Hmm.
I'm behind. Time anxiety
Hmm.
is a real diagnosis. It's a real thing. It's something that,
Hmm.
and whether you're diagnosed with it or not, you're probably dealing with it on some level. So
Hmm.
when someone's having that reoccurring thought of I'm behind um,
Hmm.
with my time, like kind of talk us through like how and why that thought feels so true for us, and then like what
Hmm.
take us down the what direction does that take us if we stay with it, and then if we were to like turn it around, what would that do? Go in a different direction.
Yeah. I think coaching anxiety has been very interesting because if I'm coaching, I mean, as a little preface, I guess, if I'm coaching someone who is showing up mostly like, oh, I'm just overwhelmed and my schedule is a mess, then we really can look at the thoughts that they have about their schedule. Well, why do you think it's a mess? What is this stuff that you're doing? Whereas like we can look at those thoughts about like, okay, tell me about these steps that you're taking, tell me about what you're doing, tell me what you think about those situations. Yes. And anxiety is kind of a curveball sometimes,
Mm,
especially for midlife women. Because one of the things, yes, we could have a situation like I don't have enough time, and that makes us have thoughts about our time. But for midlife women, especially women who are in perimenopause or menopause, anxiety happens without a thought because anxiety is actually a feeling in your body, and
mm,
we call it an emotion, but it's actually a chemical. It is, I mean, all emotions are just chemical reactions, right? But anxiety just hits a little different because our brain is a meaning making machine. And what happens is for some women, especially women of our age, which is why it's such a great time to like be able to, I think you and I caught it just in time
right?
because you can be sitting there and all of a sudden your body's like, oh, hey, you're not doing anything. Here's some adrenaline. Here's some cortisol. See how you do. And those hormones, especially when they coincide with the drop in estrogen, will make you feel anxious for no
Mm,
reason at all. You can be sitting on the couch watching your favorite movie and suddenly you're like, something's wrong. So if your anxiety tends to focus on time, oh, it's because I'm supposed to be doing something. I'm behind. Who am I to be watching this movie with my family? Whatever those thoughts are, whether it's the feelings that come first or the thoughts that
mm,
come first,
mhm,
what I really recommend is get out of your head and let's go right back into the feeling because that feeling is so important. And so, what I teach my clients is to, you have to get familiar with that feeling. And those feelings are really intolerable for a lot of people. It feels desperate, it feels fast, it feels like something has to be fixed. And when nothing actually happened, when you have a, whether you want to call it a micro trigger or a hormone dump, and we see this in teenage girls too, where suddenly they're going through puberty and they just get a huge boost or drop in estrogen and they don't know what's wrong. It's just a hormone fluctuation.
mm.
But their brain starts coming up with solutions by scaring them to death. Here's a list of everything that you've done wrong to upset
Ah,
someone. Here's why you're behind and why nobody's going to take you seriously. Here's why everybody thinks you're ridiculous. Here's why, I mean, here's what's wrong. You're dying. I mean, whatever it comes up with, it's just to get you to take action. So when you're in a place where you feel like you're behind, where I don't have enough time, there's too much on my schedule, and you're constantly trying to take action because you feel anxious, you're going to sabotage your ability to step back because your body is telling you to do more.
Mm,
So, yes, but when you feel that feeling, you're not allowed to believe anything that you think.
yes.
So, oh, I have to go do this. I have to do it now. I'm behind. Hold on a minute. Do you feel anxious when you say that, or are you actually supposed to be doing something?
Mm,
I feel really anxious. Okay, then hold on a second. Sit with that feeling. Let's find some ways to lower that feeling of anxiety in your body so that now we can say, okay, what do
mm,
you really need to do? Or what's really important right now? Because when you learn to sit with it or just identify those feelings, your brain starts to recognize that feeling as, oh, I feel this a lot and I don't like it at all. It feels really uncomfortable. And it'll probably still start generating thoughts about what it is that you're supposed to be doing or, where you're behind. But if you can recognize it as that's an anxious thought, then you can choose not to respond. And when
mm.
you choose not to respond, that's when you start creating those new pathways in your brain that allow you to say, no, I'm not going to do it. And that's really where I was at the beginning of November. I was like, but how am I supposed to stop these things? They're so important to my business, which was not true. They weren't getting me anywhere. I was doing a million things, but it felt so necessary.
Yeah.
I'm failing. My business will quit. Nobody will ever, I'll never sign, I'll never work with another client again. I'll never do these things. Crazy, crazy thoughts that I knew weren't true, but boy, they felt real.
Mm, yeah. And I love because I was the poster child for ignoring the feelings for a really long time,
Mm-hmm.
then I would
Mm-hmm.
just push through. And that's part of my story that my audience knows is, with a husband who deployed and three kids at
Mm-hmm.
home that I homeschooled and ministries that I ran and a business that I ran and, taking care of a household and serving in the community. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there were a lot of probably feelings that I was stuffing because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have time to think about them and what they meant. And I just figured the solution was just do more and keep going and
Yeah.
push through this because that's what Lissa does. And yeah, eventually it caught up with me, in the knot in my stomach, in the tension in my shoulders and my neck, but really in that ball in my throat, the globus hystericus,
Mm-hmm.
where my body was like keeping the score, even though I wasn't,
Yeah. And that
really
book is
doing
so
that.
good. If you can get through it, I mean, it's a textbook, but so good to explain all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about like we all experience anxiety at some level, like we said, whether it's
Oh, yeah.
diagnosed or not. I think a lot of things because I teach time underlies everything. And so I do believe
Mm-hmm.
probably a lot of it is somehow, in some way, we could probably tie a line back to time, or something around time,
Mm-hmm.
whenever we're
Mm-hmm.
feeling something or whatever. So why we've talked a little bit about why this is a struggle for midlife women because I love the fact that you just shed light on the fact that it could some of it is just hormones and really has nothing to do with
Absolutely.
over the clock or anything like that.
Yeah.
But like
Yeah.
specifically thinking about like Christian women and those of us who are running businesses, like
Mm-hmm.
why is this something that you need to not do what Lissa did for way too long and ignore it and push it under the rug because it'll just go away. I don't have time to deal with this.
Yeah.
Yeah, why is this a struggle for us? What does it cost us if we are pushing things under the rug and not taking the time
Mm-hmm.
to do what you're telling us to and to pay attention to it? Kind of talk us through a little bit about that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe even too, like, what's the world telling us to do? Because I'm always coming at things from a totally different perspective. And what do we do in the kingdom? Because I think the
Mm-hmm.
world is out there running around in circles, and stuff like that. So why
Who
is it a
knows what's happening
problem?
out there? I'm
Yeah, why
trying
is it a
not to even
problem? What's
look.
it costing us? And then like, what's the world telling us to do in response?
Yeah. So I think that we have two separate things there. So anxiety makes you feel like you need to go fast. And so consequently, giving yourself all the grace with this, you went fast because it felt necessary and it served you.
Mhm.
You got things done. And you had a husband who was deployed, and you had kids who needed you, and a business who needed you, and a community who relied on you. So there was part of you that was getting little dopamine hits in there, and you were probably having some success, which made it feel necessary and safe and productive. But
Yeah.
in the meantime, whatever those emotions were that went with anxiety, and yeah, I know that anxiety is an emotion, but I like to say only kind of, because if you can relate anxiety as a feeling and not an emotion,
Mm,
what I've noticed with myself is when I decide to dig into it, and I don't do this often because I feel like this is a waste of time. There are a lot of people who would argue otherwise, but I think retroactively going back and trying to find the cause of your anxiety
mm,
isn't necessary unless you have had a a big traumatic event, if you had abuse, if your house burned down around you, if someone next to you, someone close to you died, if you experienced something horrific, please go to therapy, right? Like those things do deserve your attention. They deserve to like bring you back into the present moment. However, if you are in a place where you're like, I'm just trying to figure out why I feel this way, what can happen is that you're giving it more attention than it needs and more time than it needs. But anxiety itself, because it's a feeling, often what it is, it's not just anxiety, it's a lot of other emotions. And so sometimes when I picture this, I will assume that people who are listening to this or watching this have seen Christmas Vacation. I feel like everybody's seen it. But you know, when Clark
Many
Griswold's like
times.
a little knot here and he pulls out that ball of Christmas lights, that is what anxiety is to me. Like every
Mm,
time I picture it, it is a great big ball of wires. And it's every Christmas light is a different emotion to a different situation.
mm,
And we think that it means, we think it means what our thoughts are, but sometimes it's guilt. Sometimes it's sadness. Sometimes it's shame. Sometimes it's heartbreak. Sometimes it's mourning. But every time, there's love in there. And
mm.
we forget that because it feels so awful. But you can't grieve something or feel guilty or feel shame or feel embarrassment or feel anything else without love. It's always in there. And that's really important. So when we don't take the time to figure out, wait, what am I actually feeling? So when you were in that stage of life where you were kind of being all the things for your community and your family and doing it by yourself, there were probably a lot of emotions in there. And
Yeah.
what happened was they all turned into that big ball of Christmas lights and pinned themselves to your nervous system. So if you can pretend like your nervous system is that big ball of lights, what happens is those memories get pinned to your
Mm.
nervous system. So you'll see guys that come home from, let's say they're in a combat situation and they'll start talking about the combat and they start rubbing their shoulder. There's a memory stored in there. So we used to think for a long time that your memories were stored in your brain, and they're not. They're stored in your whole body, in your
Mm.
muscles, on your nervous system. So when we don't deal with those, we just are sticking those memories to different areas. And if we can say, oh, wait a second, what I really felt was lonely. What I really felt was like fear that I couldn't get things done. What I really felt was um, maybe it really was anxiety or fear about like, I don't know how to do this, or overwhelm. Just so many things stressing you out will lead to stress, and stress leads to more anxiety. So whatever it was, when we don't handle those emotions, they'll turn into that big ball of Christmas lights. And
Yeah.
then you have to unknot them before you can
Yeah.
do something great.
Right. Okay. I love this thing. And you said it twice now. So I'm going to go back to it. I started and now I have an arrow next to it in my notes. I hope you guys are writing stuff down. But Megan said it goes away when you don't give it attention. And it's so interesting because I literally just wrote this in the notes on my phone the other day. Let me pull it up real fast. It says, um, pay attention to what you're paying attention to, right? Like, and that works both directions,
Yeah,
right? If you want
it does.
something to grow or to improve or to, whatever, then you need to give it attention. But this is kind of like that opposite way. Like, we're giving so much attention to something we don't want to continue to grow and, and feed it and whatever. So how do we do that then? Like if we're experiencing, feeling some of these things in our body, if we're noticing some of these things, how do we not give it attention so that it goes away, but ultimately so it doesn't become the ball of Christmas lights, right? Where it just becomes this
Hmm. Hmm.
bigger mess that now we're carrying around everywhere and it's affecting everything.
Hmm. Yeah, it's super duper simple, but we know simple doesn't mean easy. So it's going to feel, the first time you try to do this, you're going to say, she's a liar. Like
That's okay. I get told that all the time
you
when I
will
tell people
accuse
things.
me of being a liar, and that's okay. Stick with me. Um, Going back to that feeling in your body, right? And the most basic thing you can do is say, I feel the anxiety in my body, whatever feels like know your very first symptom. For me, when I was just learning, like I discovered most everything about myself on accident um after the fact. Like hindsight is amazing. So, but I remember I would notice that my hands would feel hot and numb and tingly. That was my first anxiety symptom.
Hmm.
So other people will have they'll feel like they can't swallow. They'll feel like their heart is speeding up. All of a sudden they get sweaty,
Hmm.
tunnel vision, their ears are ringing, whatever it is. People will tell me their hips hurt,
Hmm.
whatever it is, your first symptom. When you notice that, that is your first clue that it is time to get out of your head. And what I mean by that is to say, okay, I feel this. And I know, I recognize now that what's going to happen is my brain is going to start coming up with the scariest things it can think of about who I am, about why I'm safe, about what will happen to me. And just remember that your brain's just doing that because it's trying to figure out how to solve for how you feel. So if you can use that feeling as a guide to say, well, that's one thought. Oh, that was a thought. Whoa, why would I think that? That was the good thing. That's just a thought. And if we can go, don't try to make the thoughts go away. Because the more that we fight them off, the more we try to argue against them, the more we're engaging. And the more your brain says, well, what if this? What if they tell you that you're going to get fired if you don't do this right now? What if they tell you that you're a terrible mom if you don't get this done right now? What if they tell you you're going to fail? What if you'll be embarrassed? The more your brain comes up with those stories, it's just trying to find all the areas to protect you from when really what's going on is you just feel anxious. You've got a feeling in your body. So whatever it was that tripped that feeling in your body, and maybe it was something that you saw in your calendar that you were like, oh gosh, now
Mm.
if that makes that anxious feeling come, you can say, okay, I'm not allowed to believe that for a second. What could I actually, once I calm that feeling down, and there are some grounding techniques. I mean, you can Google, guys, there are 1,001 grounding techniques all over the internet, and I'm happy to share them with you, but you can Google them faster than you can talk to me. So just Google grounding techniques because they're great and they all work. You just have to find that one that works for you. That's something that I help people do. But find one that works so that you can then take your thoughts captive and say, oh, isn't it weird that I think I don't have time for that? How do I feel about that really? Do I feel like, do I have thoughts about what it is that's on my list? Like, is it really necessary? Or is it just something that I put on my calendar that now I'm like, oh, nope, that's not necessary for me. And what if you did say no? But it really goes back to calming your body down and just recognizing that I am having anxious thoughts right now. I'm not allowed to believe those or even engage until my body is calm. Because what happens is, as soon as your body calms down, the thoughts stop. It's one of those things where if we just notice that this happens for people a lot in the middle of the night, where they wake up and their mind's racing with, oh my gosh, what is this thing I have to do? What happened at work today that everybody looked at me? My greatest suggestion for that is keep sticky notes next to your bed, write it down and say, as soon as I wake up, I'm handling that. You won't even remember. You'll be like, oh, that's weird. And it won't bother you anymore because it wasn't an issue. It was just your brain going bananas in the middle of the night.
Yeah, yeah, which is definitely a midlife thing, right? Where it feels like
Oh,
waking up more and
yeah.
yeah,
I get
whatever it is.
real existential at 2 a.m. I worry about things that like the volcano under Yellowstone or like comets, never anything I could solve. So I'm lay there, I'm like, I'll worry about this tomorrow.
Yeah,
And but I just know I know how my brain works. It's out of control at 2 a.m. and I'm like, not now.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet, yeah, it is a reality. And so just completely ignoring it is, again, for so long, I would just shove things under the carpet because it just
Mhm.
felt like that was the easier thing to do. But then that bulge under the carpet kept getting bigger to the point that now you start tripping over it. And then you're like, you have to
Mhm.
address it because it's piled up so much and it's the big knot of all that. So I'm thinking about what scripture is coming to mind right now. I'm always like, what does scripture have to say? There's so much, right, about anxiety,
Mhm.
things like that.
Mhm.
But one of the things that comes to mind is how Jesus was teaching the Sermon on the Mount, like, don't worry about
Mhm.
tomorrow. And I look at
Yeah.
this, I teach this around time as well, because he's comparing and contrasting the kingdom of God from the way that people are living in the world around them, right? In the world around
Mhm.
them, they
Mhm.
are running around in circles going, what am I going to eat? What am I going to wear? What am I going to drink? I mean, those probably are
Mhm.
the three things that we're waking up in the middle of the night worrying about, but we all can, what am I? What am I? What am I? Right.
Right.
And he's like, but don't go running in circles like the people who don't know me and don't know the Father, who already knows what you need, and all of that. Like, seek me first, and these other
Mhm.
things will be taken care of. Like they will, because your Heavenly Father already knows what you need. So I'd love for you to do maybe a little
Mhm.
comparing, contrasting between, I mean, there's so much, in mental health and self-help and so many different avenues that want to give us all kinds of, the world's advice around what to do in this area. So I'd love for you to just do a little Venn diagram for us, maybe go back to our teacher days of like,
Yeah.
what's the world telling us to do? what do you feel like the Lord is telling us to do? And, are there some overlapping places there? And then what are some things that are, like different so that we are not just addressing this like people who are living life without God? I mean, because it should
Yeah.
make a difference in every area of our life, especially in an area like this.
Yeah, I think that when we think about the things that feel really necessary for us to do, go back to Christmas, right? And we talk about the hustle and bustle of the holidays, like that's supposed to be a good thing. Like I don't want to hustle and bustle anymore. I just want to like sit here on my couch and eat cookies. And
And go for
luckily, your
walks so I
brain,
can have more.
right, right, and then go for walks so I can eat more cookies. But but if we think about how much emphasis we put on like hustle culture or going out there and just like, get it, go, 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 let's get it done and things like that. Yes, but and, right? Always yes, and we have to find balance in that
Mm.
because even while God said, yes, don't worry about those things, don't, God's going to take care of it. And I wanted to remind me that I want to talk to you about like something like an activity that people can do in your journal, because this, I
Okay.
swear, saved my life a million times. Um, but if we talk about the things that we want to accomplish, and if we know, like, this is what my purpose is, this is what my accomplishes, and I 100% believe that every single person was created for a very specific purpose. And sometimes we don't figure that out until we're like 50
Right.
or whatever it is, like when you figure that out. But if we're saying, okay, it's, I feel like I'm supposed to be out there killing it. I'm supposed to be, working all these hours. I should check my emails after I get home from work. I should do all of this. To what ends? And then in terms of like feeling anxious about it, we also have these other things that people will tell you that you should do that yes, in the moment, right? And some things are like, well, just brush all those emotions under your rug.
Mm.
Or, hey, you know what? It's okay. You could just like call your friend and get some reassurance that you're okay. Don't do that. Stop it. Or, hey, I mean, for me, it was like get on Google and look up your symptoms for the love.
Oh
Don't do
my.
that
Yeah, don't go
ever.
there.
It's the grim reaper every time you'll
And it's
die.
just going to waste your time.
Um,
Let's be honest. You're going to get in scroll home
right.
or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Or, that you're supposed to be. And I think that there's some really tricky areas in here with the Bible and with what we think are what our interpretation is. And one that can be really sticky for people is give to others, give everything you have, give them the coat off your back, do that. And when we do that, not that there's anything wrong with giving, please give, please be generous. And if you give until you're empty, you don't have anything left to give, you're not helping anyone.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really hard crisscross. And so I have kind of it's funny. I really, really, like in full transparency, I really struggled with my faith when I was my most anxious.
Mm.
And I think that in hindsight, I didn't know why, because it wasn't because I didn't believe.
Mm.
And it wasn't because I wasn't praying. It's because I was begging. I
Oh,
was like, I was begging like every night. And it was to the like, please make this go away. Make it go
sure.
away, or just let me be like, I mean, it got really dark for me. And I was like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know why God won't help me. So in that sense, going back into faith, and there's like, if you go into like Hebrews 11:1, which is faith is being sure of what you hope for and certain of what you haven't seen. I really honest to God think that kept me alive. Like for a long time. It was rough. But now looking at that now, I'm like, wait a second. I was doing it all wrong. I was putting so much, going back to that quote, worry is wishing for what you don't want. I was
Mm.
praying about what I didn't want.
Yeah.
I was never praying for what I did want.
Mm.
So like when we look at time, what do you want your time to look like?
Mm.
If you had a block of time, what would you want to do? What would feel really good and make you feel like you were serving your purpose? What do you want your time to be structured like? What's too much time? What are your hours? Like, what are your boundaries around your time?
Mm. Mm.
Where is it like where you have a cutoff where you're like, no, my kids are coming home from school, and my two that are still left in the house are high schoolers. I don't want to have them walk in and be like, peace out. I got to go do these things for another couple hours. So I'm really intentional about at least having some time when they get home where I can be like, hey, most days, every once in a while, I will have a phone call or something that comes up. But most of the time, once I get them home, everything comes down a notch. And I'm
Mm.
like, no, this is my time with my kids, and I'm not willing to sacrifice that. And I think that, like, in this very mixed up thought download I just did. When I was in that place where I was trying to focus on like, my mom would say, Megan, if you pray about this, you know it's going to be okay. Anxiety isn't rational. So I prayed and prayed and prayed and
Yeah,
prayed and
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
know why and just was doing it wrong. And there's just so many facets of that. But to your point, if we can lean into what's important and what God has laid out for us and trust Him and use faith and not be looking at what we don't want, but
Mhm.
really being intentional about like, God says you have all of these things. God said you can do all of these things.
Mhm.
What do you want? Where's God going to fill in those blanks for you where you feel like you're not doing enough?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That was mine. It was chasing my not enoughness. My time wasn't
Yeah.
enough. I wasn't doing enough. I wasn't enough. It was this like slippery slope that just it would take me in these cycles, and then I
Yeah.
go down, and then I'd pull myself back up, and then it would just kind of be that not enoughness would come up again and things like that. So you asked me to bring you
Yeah.
back to the journal exercise. So
Yeah.
I want you to make
Yeah.
sure to tell us about that.
Yeah.
Grab that.
Yeah. And this is something for like when you are noticing that you have thoughts about your time, right? So, one of the things that really helped me helped me to be able to begin to capture my thoughts was to write down what I thought was going to happen. So maybe for people, you say, if I don't complete this task, then I think I've failed or I'm getting behind.
Mhm.
I'll get fired from my job, whatever it is that people think that's making them overwork or not manage their time correctly. Um, and then write down, I think this will happen. This is how where I felt it in my body. And then every day, some days you'll write not anxious or anxiety level 2, however you want to structure it, where you say, this was how anxious I was. This is where my thoughts went.
Mhm.
And so, specifically about, I thought I had to do this. This is what I was expecting. Do it every day. And suddenly, after about a few weeks, you can look back and you'd be like, that's so funny because I had that exact same feeling, but I thought something different. And you can start noticing that, like, just because you feel it, your brain's like, oh, but this time it's probably because your neighbor thinks you're a slacker or they think you're irresponsible for saying no when they ask you to volunteer at church. How dare you? And you'll be like, wait, nothing happened. I've thought that before and nothing happened. I've felt that before and nothing happened. So consequently, you just get a record of either proving yourself right or proving yourself wrong. But I
Mhm.
do think that for me, journaling was huge for that. And I would write it every day on a calendar. And mine, of course, like was around my health, where I would say, felt this, thought this. And then I
Mhm.
would notice I would have the same feelings in my body and it would just change based on whatever it was. So that really goes back to those thoughts about how is it safe to put down that boundary? Why don't you just do it and see what happens? Come back in a day and see what you thought the next day and how that didn't happen.
Yeah, it's almost like instead of it feeling like it's the first time every time, like this is something new,
Yeah.
notice the patterns, notice,
Yeah.
the triggers, notice the repeated
Mhm.
feelings, notice the repeated thoughts, and then get curious about it. And I love that. Like
Yeah.
that's a great way to track your growth because sometimes I think we can get really frustrated with ourselves because we are going to be working on something like this really hard. And then we are going to have that day when it's just like everything feels like it's right back where it was. And yet you can go back to your journal and be like, but no. Because look at all these days that I felt differently, or I felt something that I
Hmm.
didn't follow the rabbit trail of the thought that would have or could have come along with
Hmm.
that. And see our growth. I think
Yeah.
it's a lot easier to keep moving in the right direction if we're not feeling like we're back in
Yeah.
square one every single time.
Yeah. And
Okay.
I think it's so like when we look at it from the outside, we can see our patterns when we're not
Mhm.
anxious.
Oh,
But
sure.
when you're in that moment and like I do this all the time, and we make up stories about, well, this is just who I am. And it's like, but I have to. Or, and until we're conscious of like, no, but I do this all the time. I know I do this all the time. And now I'm going to choose to stop. And it has to be a choice. It has to be a choice to say, and I'm gonna risk it this one time. I'm gonna risk everybody telling me that I'm a horrible person because I backed out of the church dinner, right? Like, so if that, and that's a big one, right? Especially, I think we can get really caught up in churches need volunteers and we want to help them. We want them to be successful, but do not ask me to do like, there are certain things that I'm like, no, I'm not your girl for that. There
Yeah.
are other things I'm happy to volunteer with, but if I said yes to everything I got asked to do, I would be overwhelmed. I wouldn't have time. And
Yeah.
so we've got some guilt that can sneak in there. But if you can just say, hey, you know what? I'm going to risk everybody saying that I'm a horrible person and I'm going to say no this time. Sit in that feeling. Don't push it away. Like, I feel really anxious right now. I can tell my brain's coming up with stories about why I need to go back and say yes, or why I'll just go ahead and do it anyway. Sit with it, and then use that journal to be able to go back. And then you have written evidence, because it's
Mm,
one thing to have it in your head, but it's
mm.
entirely another to put it on paper when you put that down and say, oh, that's weird. I've thought that like 5 times this month and nothing happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because your
That's
brain will
powerful.
forget, and it won't believe itself, which is silly.
So crazy. God designed us so beautifully, and yet it's like
I'm
we
like,
fight the
there's
process.
some design flaws I would like an update on. Like, it's time to update the software. Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm looking forward to heaven when yes, everything is updated, including the body and the mind. And we'll, yeah,
I'm hoping there's
well,
just like, just zap me. Let's update
right?
that
Oh,
software right
wow,
now. Yeah.
wow, wow. Yeah, I love this, and with anything, right? Especially worry and things like that and anxiety, like it's never going to be time well spent. If we are,
No.
it's not that it's wrong to give it time when it needs like you're telling us to, but to let
Right.
it, just continue to fester and stew and all of that is never going to have a good ROI because like you said, it's focusing on what you
Mhm.
don't want. So
Right.
well, how is that leading us
Yeah.
towards the right thing? So what would you say to that person
Yeah.
listening today who's like, okay, Megan, this resonated with me. Yeah, probably have more of this going on than I maybe care to admit or have admitted up
Hmm.
until this point. What would be like that one piece of encouragement that you would give her to like start helping her move in that direction
Yeah.
that she wants to go?
Yeah. Get to know yourself and don't be afraid of how your body feels. I think that was a big one for me. It is uncomfortable, and I know that it feels really urgent and desperate. But as soon as you know yourself, you have to know yourself.
Mhm.
Like, you really do. And I think that one thing I want to clarify, because I don't know that I was clear, when I say not giving your anxiety the attention that it wants, that doesn't mean not giving yourself the attention that you need.
Mhm.
Those are
Yeah.
two really different
Yes.
things, because saying, I feel really anxious, but then you go down that anxious thought rabbit hole, that's entirely different than saying, I feel really anxious, and the emotion attached to that is whatever, guilt
Yeah. Yeah.
or shame or, fear or sadness, whatever that is, and saying, okay, what actually happened? Like, what am I thinking about that's making me feel guilty? How do
Mm.
I handle that? What if it's okay if I feel guilty? What
Mm.
if I'm just going to feel guilty for a little while? Because that allows that emotion to process through, and letting yourself say, oh, yeah, this is guilt. It made me feel anxious. And
Mm.
then all of those thoughts about whatever your anxious thoughts, the thoughts are what don't deserve your attention. The emotions deserve your attention, and those are
Okay.
entirely different. And
Yeah.
those emotions really come from the feeling in your body. Every emotion has a different chemical makeup, which I think is so cool. And it's so particular that if you take a tear out of a microscope, like put it under a microscope of someone who has happy tears versus sad tears versus grief tears or angry tears, all like when you look at them, the crystallized makeup is entirely different. They can be like, that's a sad tear, that's a happy tear, and they can see it because it's a different chemical,
So
which is crazy. Isn't that amazing?
right?
I think that's so
And again,
amazing.
points to a designer, not this random
Yes,
explosion of some matter at
right.
some point in life or
No, and we
whatever.
can
So,
pinpoint them, right?
okay.
Like, we can pinpoint them, but like that crystal pattern in those tears, I get so nerded out by science. I
That's
love it. And
cool.
there's such a crisscross. Like, all the people that say, well, you can't have faith and you can't have faith
Mhm.
and believe in science, 100% you can. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I do it every day.
Yeah. Who do you think created
So,
all this? Exactly. Yeah.
right. And don't tell me the Big Bang isn't a thing, because I'm like, let there be light. Bang, there was light.
Mhm.
I mean, come on. That's just me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So many
but
good
yeah,
things
I
we
do
could talk
think
about. And yeah.
I could go
Yeah.
on forever.
Dive
Get on my
into.
teacher hat, but
I know, but I know people
yeah,
are listening and
but
they're like, I
really,
want more of Megan. So
yes,
please
yeah,
tell us about
but
your
really,
podcast so that way they can put
yes.
you in their earbuds. And then also like what would be a good next step for someone who wants
Mhm,
to connect with you or be in your world or learn more about
mhm.
you or whatever.
Sure, sure. I have a podcast that's called More Than Anxiety, where I talk about more than anxiety, really. I talk about stress I talk about overwhelm. I talk about burnout. This week's episode that just came out today is actually about grief and about being laid off from your job and how that brings up so many feelings of grief and how to work through the stages of grief. So, lots of different topics on there for lots of different situations where you might notice that you feel anxious or stressed or overwhelmed. So that is on all the podcast platforms. I mean, from Spotify to YouTube and Amazon, all the places. So that's something you can like follow along there. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. That's where I've been spending most of my time since I decided to do the giant shutdown back in November. I'm loving it there. So it's under Megan Devito. My maiden name was LaFever. So I'm the one with the curly hair. And yeah, connect with me there and ask me questions. I'm always happy when people jump into my DMs and just say, hey, I heard this episode with you and I got to ask a question. Ask, I will answer your questions. And you can, I mean, I do check my DMs on other social media. So I'm Coach Megan DeVito on Facebook and Threads and Instagram and all of those places. But yeah, and then, I mean, if you just want to cut to the chase, you can just go to my website.
There you go.
Right. And yeah, it's just megandevito.com. So if you're like, ew, social media, I get you. I
Me
don't love it
too.
either. But yeah, my website is just my first name and last name. It's megandevito.com and you can message me there and you can schedule time to talk with me. I do free consultation calls just to help people get really clear on, hey, this is what's keeping you anxious. I mean,
Mm.
it doesn't take very long. If we have a conversation about what's going on, oh, I can tell you what's keeping you anxious. It's this right here. And then, we can talk about what it's like if you want to look at coaching.
Yeah, I love this. So we'll make sure to link to all of that in the show notes. And you guys know I
Yeah.
always invite our guests to come into the Redeemer Time community where you can get access to them and ask questions and go
Yeah.
deeper and actually start fleshing out what we talk about on the podcast. It's not going to do any good.
Yeah.
It's just in your head between your ears,
Right.
and then you
Please
go
get it
right.
out of your head.
Exactly. Go right on to the
This
next
is a
thing.
mess. Yes.
Exactly. Yes. And
Yeah.
with support, right? Like we want to get out of our head. We want to
Yes.
have someone to hold our hand and to help us, down that path and things like that. So no, you're going to find Megan really a great resource and someone who genuinely cares.
Yeah.
So I love that. So Megan, thank you so much for
Yeah.
being here with us today. I really
Yeah.
appreciate your time, your expertise, your story, just how God is weaving all
Yeah.
of these things so beautifully together for you to help step into a place where a lot of people find themselves,
Mm.
throughout various seasons of life. And so this is such an important work that you're doing, and I want to thank you for
Thank
that.
you.
So I'm curious because I always ask this question towards the end just to kind of get into
Mhm.
your heart and calendar and what things matter to you. And I love your intention
Mhm.
coming into the holidays. And so
Yeah.
because this is coming out in the new year, right? Like when you think about wanting to have a good ROI in your time, that does not mean I've
Mhm.
checked more boxes and I feel good about that, but like knowing that this return on the things you're investing your time in really matters. Like what would
Mhm.
that look like for you? What in this new year
Mm.
wanting to intentionally invest time in? And what would, why do you want to have a good ROI on that time?
Yeah. I It's funny that you mentioned this. I just set up my first podcast, or maybe it might be the one that comes out next week, but it's actually called Slow. I mean, it's literally all about slowing down and doing less in 2025. My plan is to do less, but to be more productive in doing less. So, really being just like stopping and saying, hey, what's important for me today? And to be intentional about taking time um, to rest and to
Mm.
think and to be creative. I'm an action taker and I feel great when I'm crossing things off of lists. And I'll still make a list every single day. But my daughter just said right before I came down here, she's like, I think you put too much on your list today. I'm like, I had to put too much on my list today.
You can tell when there's too much if we start getting grouchy.
I know, but I was like, yeah, I did. But she's right. She's right. Like I'm really good about like, oh, I can do this. But there will be days. I mean, I'm not going for perfect. There will be seasons where we have to do, there'll be seasons where maybe you have a launch coming up
Mhm.
and it's going to take more time, but you can balance that out on the back end by saying, hey, I'm getting ready to launch. I'm going to rest. Then
Yeah.
I'm going to go hard. And then I'm going to give myself time to rest. And I don't think it has to be a day-to-day thing. I really think it can come in seasons and chunks of time. So really stopping to think, I think is just important for
Mm.
me. And
Yeah.
that's a
And that's what I
challenge
teach people to do
sometimes.
every day. Like do what most
Right.
people don't and won't, and that is to push pause in the busyness
Yeah.
and actually think about your time,
Yes.
about where it's going,
Thinking is
think about
hard,
what you're giving
guys.
attention to and why. And
Yeah.
and what
Yeah.
the result is, and if that's a direction you want to keep going.
Yes.
Just like we
Yeah,
would stop and
absolutely.
think, it really would save us a whole lot of time worrying
Yeah.
about the things we don't want and giving time and
Yeah.
attention to things we don't want. You're going to love this. I
Yeah.
have this sitting next to me. In my CEO program, when I coach business owners, we have a CEO
Hmm.
club, and we talk about books that are going to help us with our time. And I actually just had someone reach
Ooh,
out to me yesterday and say, "Hey, Lissa, what books do you recommend for time management and productivity?" And I was like, "Ooh, I can't wait to
yeah.
answer this because my answer is not going to be what she expects." And I'm like, "Here's the first book we're reading this year. It's called Relaxed by Megan Fate Marshman.
Yee.
And the subtitle is Walking with the One Who Isn't Worried About a Thing." And it's about, yeah, just how do we
Perfect.
live out Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 to really trust the Lord with all our heart. And so I'm like,
So
yeah,
good.
that's the solution. The solution is not more boxes, more checklists, more, all the things. It's
Yeah.
doing less and it's paying attention to what we're giving attention to and
Yeah.
walking with him and letting him produce the fruit. Let's be honest, apart from him, we can do nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, stop
Yeah.
striving. So I love this.
Yeah.
Thank you
So
so
good.
much for your time, for your
Ah,
expertise.
thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been really fun. And we'll look forward to continuing the conversation over inside the community. So if you guys are not in there yet, or you're just finding the Redeem Her Time podcast here in the new year, you can join the free Redeem Her Time community at redeemhertime.com/community. Come on in. It's a safe place. We're here to talk about life and business and faith and time and how all these things go together. And you're going to love having a supportive group of people that are also working on some of those things as well. So I will see you over there, Megan, and I'll see the rest of you
All
there
right.
as well. Thanks so much.